What if I told you that the strategy that minted 1,000 landlords last decade is now being called dead on arrival? Would you believe it? Or would you think people just couldn't handle the heat? Because right now, in 2026, the BRRRR method is at the center of one of the biggest debates in real estate investing, and the stakes couldn't be higher. For the uninitiated, BRRRR stands for buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat. A strategy so beautifully simple on paper that it basically prints wealth, at least that's what the YouTube gurus told us. The idea is you buy a distressed property, force equity through renovations, rent it out, pull your capital back out through a cash out refinance, and do it all over again like a money recycling machine that never stops spinning. The problem is that machine jammed somewhere around 2022 when the Federal Reserve decided to wage all-out war on inflation and rates went from near zero to over 7% almost overnight. What was once a smooth conveyor belt of cheap debt and easy refinancing became something closer to trying to run a marathon in concrete boots. Think of it this way, BRRRR was basically built on the assumption that you could always borrow cheap and force appreciation faster than the cost of borrowing. When rates double, that math doesn't just get harder, it gets humiliating. Like showing up to a knife fight and realizing you brought a spoon. Back in 2019 and 2020, investors were refinancing at 3 and 4%, pulling out nearly all their capital and still cash flowing positively. It felt borderline illegal how well it worked. Now, those same deals require you to either find a deeper discount, accept thinner margins, or hold longer before the refinance actually makes sense, and not everyone has the patience or the reserves for that. The psychological damage is real too, because once you've seen a strategy work like magic, it's genuinely hard to accept that the conditions that made it magical no longer exist. Experts like David Green, who literally wrote the book on BRRRR, have even publicly acknowledged that the strategy requires far more discipline and selectivity in this rate environment, which is a polite way of saying the reckless version of this game is over. Here's the historical truth. Though real estate has always moved in cycles, and every single cycle has a moment where people declare some beloved strategy extinct, only for it to resurface when conditions shift. The BRRRR method isn't broken, it's just been stress tested. And it's now separating the investors who understood the fundamentals from the ones who just memorized the acronym. One of the biggest misconceptions floating around right now is that BRRRR doesn't work at all in a high rate environment, and that's just flat out wrong. It's lazy thinking, dressed up as wisdom. The strategy still works if you buy at a deep enough discount, which means maybe 20 to 30 cents on the dollar in distress rather than the 15 to 20 cents you could get away with before the bar is higher, not gone. There's also this myth that the refinance always has to happen immediately for the deal to make sense. But plenty of seasoned investors are now running a modified version where they hold, stabilize, let the market breathe, and refinance in year 2 or 3 when conditions are more favorable. It's less sexy, it's slower, but it's still the same machine just running on a longer timer. Historically, the investors who thrived during high rate environments were the ones who shifted their acquisition criteria aggressively and stopped chasing deals that barely worked, even in a perfect scenario. Think about the investors who bought during the savings and loan crisis of the late 80s or post-2008. They weren't waiting for rates to drop, they were negotiating prices that made the rate irrelevant. The practical lesson here is brutally simple. Your deal has to work at today's rates, not the rates you're hoping for next year. If the only way your BRRRR pencils out is by assuming a refinance at 5% when rates are at 7%, you're not underwriting a deal, you're writing fan fiction. Position sizing matters more than almost anything else right now, because over-leveraging in a high-rate environment is how you turn a manageable setback into a catastrophe. Keep reserves, don't stretch on purchase price, and for the love of everything, stop letting enthusiasm substitute for math. We're also living in a moment where distressed inventory is quietly starting to increase, as some over-leveraged landlords from the 2020 to 2022 era begin running out of runway. That friction in the market is actually creating opportunity for disciplined buyers who've been patient. And patience, real patience, not passive waiting, is its own competitive advantage. The irony of all this is that BRRRR may actually be more powerful in 2026 than the hype cycle suggested it was. Precisely because fewer people are doing it well, and competition at the distressed acquisition level has cooled in many markets. less competition, plus motivated sellers, plus a strategy built on forced equity equals a window that won't stay open forever. So here's the philosophical bottom line. No strategy is bulletproof, but the best strategies are built on principles that survive across cycles. And BRRRR's core principle of buying below value and recycling capital is as sound as it's ever been. The question was never whether BRRRR works. The question is whether you do. Discipline, deal selection, and sizing your risk appropriately will always matter more than the rate environment, the market cycle, or whatever the loudest voice on the internet is telling you this week. The investors who win over decades aren't the ones who timed everything perfectly. They're the ones who stayed consistent when everyone else got emotional. And honestly, whether rates drop next year or stay elevated for another 3, the fundamentals of buying right and forcing value don't care about the macro. They care about your process. Comfort with uncertainty isn't weakness. It's the whole game. If you're ready to explore whether BRRRR or any other real estate strategy makes sense for your situation, we can help you get started, whether in real estate investing, home contracting, work, or finding lenders. Check out our links in the description below.